Well, like I said, good morning. It's good to see you all this morning. We are making our way through March here, and this weekend is a busy weekend here at Grace. There are 8th through 12th graders that are gone today and have been gone this weekend at the retreat with our Norton and County Line campuses, and Josiah's been with them, and so we're praying for not only life change, we're praying for a neat time to grow together as a community, and so hoping for some fun stories as they come back. Pray for them, right, as they kind of get back into the regular rhythm of things. A lot of them go to school tomorrow, whatever that may be. And so, but pray that God does some neat things as he stirs into their heart moving forward out of this retreat. If this is your first time, you jumped in at a great time. We are in the middle, about 8-9 weeks into this series called The Way of Change. And that's what we've been saying, that change, internal transformation is something that I think we all desire and something we all long for and look for. And as followers of Jesus, like, how does that work? We navigate this thing. What does that look like? How do we pursue that? We've been talking through spiritual practices, entering into the presence of God. And this is what we've been saying all series. The way of change is following the way of Jesus. Right, practicing his presence in my life. That's what it looks like. And these practices allow us to walk into the presence of God, which allows for transformation through the Holy Spirit. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, I hope this is encouraging and equipping. So I've been saying the last couple weeks, I hope this is something you can put into the rhythm of your life, can kind of put into play, put into practice as you walk on a daily basis. If you're someone that's not said yes to Jesus, this church thing's kind of new to you, God thing, you're kind of checking out, what does this look like? I hope that you get to peek into the beauty of who Jesus is and following him and what that looks like. We started the first week of this series in a passage, John 15. We're going to go back to that to launch this sermon this morning. John 15:5. This is what Jesus says as he's talking to his disciples. This is where we launched from, kind of have been going back to. Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Right? He uses this illustration, this image of a vine and a branch. And he says, if you remain in me, just like the branch does to the vine, you will produce much fruit. We talked about this the first week. The goal is not to produce fruit and kind of like hard work and kind of force it out. We're going to produce fruit, but rather it's to remain in Jesus. Stay connected to the vine. Stay connected to the relationship with Jesus. And out of that, fruit will be produced in your life. We looked at the fruit of the Spirit, things of that nature. And Jesus continues in verse 10 and 11. He says this, if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Right? It's a powerful picture. He says, remain in me. Remain in me like I do with my Father. And out of that, you'll experience my joy, but your joy will be complete. Like that's all I want, for you to remain in me. Stick to the relationship. Stay connected to the vine. Stay there, and you will experience joy and joy to its completeness if you do so. Billy Sunday has a quote. He says this, if you have no joy, there's a leak in your Christianity somewhere, right? There's truth to that. If there is no joy in your life, right, then what is going on in regards to following Jesus? Following Jesus should produce joy, an everlasting joy that our world sees, that people around us see. I think so often Christians will walk this earth and will walk this journey of life, and we're just kind of drudging through the journey of following Jesus. People are like, why would I jump into that? It doesn't look joyful. It doesn't look exciting. It doesn't look like that would be something I would want to do. But here's the thing about joy. Joy, right? In our world, joy can be hard to come by. Like, how do you experience joy, right? Joy can be hard to come by. There's circumstances, there's people, there's situations that happen. You're like, how do I experience joy? And I realized that this week. Because last weekend, my son, he was running a fever. We think he had some sort of the flu, right? But that didn't stop there, because my son, who had the fever, gave whatever he had to my wife. On Tuesday morning, about 2 o'clock, she woke up and said, I don't feel very good. And that whole day, she couldn't keep anything down. And so she called her doctor. Doctor's like, well, you're pregnant, and so we probably need to get you into the hospital, make sure everything's okay and all right. And so Tuesday night, I take my wife to the hospital. We're in like the maternity section. They're checking the baby. They're giving her IVs. While we're in the maternity, in the hospital, we're sitting there. She's in the bed, and I'm like, I just got to get up, walk around. When I get up, I feel like I'm going to pass out, and so I drop to my knees, and I'm getting sick, and I'm not feeling good. And so all of a sudden, my wife, who was in the bed, in the maternity section, getting IVs, she shifts out of the bed because she's feeling better, and now I'm in the maternity section, laying in the bed. The doctor walks in and says, what in the world is going on right now? I'm like, I'm so sorry. This is not how I planned. It's not what I wanted, right? We fell into sickness. Now, luckily, if I shook your hand, I'm okay today. We've gotten through all that stuff. But I think inevitably, we can all lay in hospital beds of life. That we can all lay in specific hospital beds of life that keep us from having joy. I think there's two. Hurry sickness and worry sickness. I think those things can keep us from joy in our life. Just like me and Jess are laying in the hospital beds, which, by the way, you don't go and spread that's what happened this last week to Joel, okay? That didn't happen, right? But we're laying in the hospital bed sick. We in life can lay there sick to hurry and sick to worry that keeps us from experiencing joy in our life. We talked about hurry sickness. I think it was the second or third week with Silence and Solitude. We said hurry sickness is the constant to-do list that I always have to keep up with, the multitasking, the things I got to go here and take people here and take the kids here and run, always doing things to the point where you lay in bed with your spouse and you look over and you're like, who are you? Because we don't have time to connect. We're just always running, always in a hurry, always at the fast pace, and our cell phones don't help, and the culture doesn't help, and we're always got to have these things accomplished. Evelyn Underhill writes this: the spirit of hurry and the spirit of joy do not reside in the same house. They cannot. They will always butt heads. It's not possible, right? Can't always be in a hurry and experiencing joy at the same time. And my fear is that we're a hurry culture and that we're going to get done with hurrying around and not know where to lock into because that was our life and we're just running around, right? We miss the moments of joy. But I also think that worry sickness is something that we face, right? Not to mention the coronavirus and all that's going on in our world, but just life things week to week that you worry about, that you're anxious about, that you're overwhelmed about. It's work, it's the kids, it's life, it's friends, it's family. What's going to happen to our world, whatever it may be, and we're just worried about every little thing. We're just going, and we become sick. Right? And there's people and there's circumstances, there's situations, but I also think that the mundane monotony of life can steal our joy. I was reading a book by a guy named John Ortberg. The Life You've Always Wanted is the book title. I would write that down. It is a great read. The Life You've Always Wanted by John Ortberg. He has a chapter in there. He's talking about the practice of celebration, which we're talking about today. And he calls it the title is D-Da-Day. And he tells this story when he was younger and he had young kids, right? They would do bath time together. So he had 3 kids and they were all at a young age where that was still something that was efficient and they could do and get it rocking and rolling. And so at this moment in time, that night they were doing bath time. They got everybody in the bathroom. There was one kid in the bathtub kind of getting cleaned up, all that stuff. There was one kid that was dressed over here, just kind of figuring things out, just kind of chilling, right? And then there was another kid that just got out of the bathtub. And he's like, got this girl out of the bathtub, got my daughter out of the bathtub, and all of a sudden she just starts running around the room yelling, "Dee-da-day, dee-da-day, dee-da-day." It's her joyful dance and her joyful kind of celebration. She's running around the room. And he's like, oh my gosh, I got to get her dried off so I can get him dried off and then get them to bed. And so he's like, Mallory, hurry. And all of a sudden she just keeps going faster and faster, dee-da-day, dee-da-day, dee-da-day. He's like, hurry, right? He's like, this is irritating. This is annoying. It's frustrating. I'm just trying to get them to bed. I'm just trying to clean them up. What in the world is going on? So he's like, Mallory, stop. Get over here. I want to dry you off. And she turns and looks at him and says, why? And this is what he says. Now, if you're a parent in the room, you're like, at that moment, it's over, right? But this is what he said. I thought it was fascinating. I had no answer. I had nowhere to go. Nothing to do, no meetings to attend, no sermons to write. I was just so used to hurrying, so preoccupied with my own little agenda, so trapped in this rut of moving from one task to another, that here was life, here was joy, here was an invitation to the dance right in front of me, and I was missing it. That's what he has to say. And I fear on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, we miss the D-da-day moments of life. We're in such a hurry. We're going. We got to get the kids here. We got to make sure job is okay. We got to make sure work's done. We got to make sure all these pieces are in play. We're fitting all the things. We're worried about this, and we're sitting in anxiety. And we miss those moments where we can celebrate with our kids and laugh with our kids and what they're doing, right? My son is a year old, and I'm like, I don't want to miss this. I want to miss this because he's not going to be a 1-year-old again. It doesn't happen, right? We miss the moments where we can celebrate the milestones. We miss the moments where we can sing and dance in our house with the music blaring with our kids. We can miss the moments of celebrating with each other. We just go and go and go. My fear is that we'll just run through this life and we'll get to the end and look back and say, what'd I do? We miss the joy-filled and the celebratory moments. Harvey Cox writes this. Now, I'm going to preface this. I'm not against work. I'm not against, work is God-given and God-created. But this is what he has to say. The modern man has been pressed so hard toward useful work and rational calculation, he has all but forgotten the joy of ecstatic celebration. I think we can pound away at the 80-hour, 90-hour work weeks, making sure everything's done, making sure it's all filled, making sure that we miss what it means and what it looks like to celebrate. I'm not against work, right? I'm not against working multi-hours overtime, but we do it so often we miss what it means to celebrate and to sit down with our families and to look in their eyes and say, let's just have a joyful moment together. In our hurry and worry-based culture, we forget how to celebrate, and we forget the joy in it, right? I think at the heart and at the center of the heart of God is joy. The center of the heart of God is joy, and I think he created us to experience joy, to Jesus' point in John 15. Galatians 5:22 and 23 say, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That is something that out of following Jesus, right? We're talking about this series, out of staying connected to the vine, joy is produced as a fruit in our lives. It should be seen. C.S. Lewis writes this, joy is the serious business of heaven. Like heaven, that is their business. That is their calling card. That is what they do. They celebrate. They rejoice. That is what is happening in heaven, right? 1 Thessalonians, Paul writes, rejoice always. And that word always, it means always, right? You watch Paul, he writes in different circumstances. He's sitting in prison and he's telling the churches to rejoice. Right? He's like, rejoice always. That should be the flavor of your life. But what does it look like for that to take place in our fast-paced culture, in our worry and hurry culture? I think sometimes we forget what that is, and it should be at the forefront of our Christian experience. It should be at the forefront of following Jesus. It should be at the forefront of experiencing Jesus and the presence of God in our life. So we're going to talk about the practice of celebration today. Practice of celebration, which, when I found out this was a spiritual practice, I was like, I'm all in. I am all into this practice, right? You celebrate, I'm like, if you're telling me to celebrate daily, I can be into that. And so I'm excited to talk about this because I think there's some neat implications with a story we're going to run through. Luke 15 is where I'm going to have you. Luke 15, if you want to turn there in your Bibles, it'll be on the screens too. But before we get there, I think, honestly, Jesus gets a bad rap. Okay, I think, honestly, Jesus gets a bad rap, right? He's someone that many people might look upon and say he's the rules and the commands guy. He's the guy that's like the teacher. He goes through all the important things. Like if you go to church, you got to make sure you're doing all the right and all the wrong. That's Jesus, right? Make sure it's in line with Jesus, what he's doing. Yet Jesus, I think, knew how to party better than we do. I think he knew how to celebrate better than we do. If you look in the Gospels, the story of Jesus' life, John 2, you start in John 2, the first miracle that Jesus performs is at a wedding. And their weddings, they did not last a day, an evening. They lasted a week, right? He turns water into wine. It's this amazing miracle. That's where it started at. He likes the party. He wanted to be at this wedding. We see in Matthew 9, he invites Matthew to follow him. Matthew's like, hey, let's go have a feast at my house. And Jesus is like, yes, let's do it, right? I want to enjoy that with you. I want to celebrate that with you. Matthew 26, right before Jesus' life ends, right, on this earth, we see him going into this celebratory fashion and feasting, right, as the Passover takes place, the last kind of feast with his disciples, right? He even celebrates before the end of his life, but he also has parables and stories, illustrations about weddings and celebrations, which we're going to look at one today. Luke 15 is where I'm going to have you. We're going to start there. Luke 15 is the parable of the prodigal son. Okay, that might be a familiar parable. Might be something that you've heard, whether you've been in church for a while or not. And this parable, I really think, gives us the heart of God, and it really gives us the heart of the kingdom of heaven. I think it just kind of really underlies those things and really shares those things through this story. And so in this story, what's fascinating is the audiences that are peeking upon Jesus' teaching in this story, in this parable. There's two audiences, okay? One audience is what would be called or titled tax collectors and sinners, right? Tax collectors in that culture were not liked very well at all, okay? They weren't liked very well at all. Basically, tax collectors, they would intake money, but they would intake more than needed so they could kind of stash some away. So people didn't like tax collectors. And sinners, just kind of a general statement, those who were not following God, those who were not following the commands, the law, they were just kind of living their own life. And so you have that section. And then you come over here and you have the religious leaders, Pharisees. They're kind of your pastors and your teachers. They did all the rights, right? They did all the right things to do. They followed the laws, the commands to a T. But they were more concerned about the external performance than they were about the internal attitude and relationship with God. This parable, and parable is basically just a short story with a big meaning and a big truth tied to it. So Jesus tells these short stories that have big truths, right? You could read it to a kid, they'd be like, oh, that's a neat story, but there's a big truth that is in it. Is the third of three stories, right? It's the third of three stories in this chapter that all kind of have similar veins to them. So I would challenge you to read it sometime this week. Let's start in verse 11. Start in verse 11. We'll go 11 and 12. Jesus is talking here. He's continued. There was a man who had two sons. Okay, start here. English class, there's three characters, right? You have a father, you have older son, and you have younger son. That's who's in this story. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Here's what's interesting, especially in that culture, I would say maybe less in this culture, is the idea of inheritance. Okay, inheritance was a big thing. The sharing of the estate was a big thing. It was passed down to the sons, the family in this case. And so the older son would get double portion. So in this case, he would get 2/3 of the estate of the father, right? The financial implications, he get the land, he get all the things the father had, 2/3 of it. And the younger son would get the rest of it, which was 1/3. So there's implications there, and the inheritance was a big thing. And so the younger son came to the father. Okay, here's what's shocking. The younger son came to the father and said, "Father, give me your inheritance." Okay, what's interesting about inheritance is usually the inheritance is passed down after the father has passed away. So basically what is happening here is the younger son is saying, "Dad, I wish you were dead. Give me what you've promised me so I could go on and do what I want to do." That's what he's saying by asking for his share of the inheritance, right? He's not asking, "Hey, I'm going to go start a business. Maybe you could help me out. Hey, I'm going to move away. Maybe you can help me out." No, he's like, "I want it and I want you gone. I could care less about our relationship. I just want the stuff that you've promised me." I remember when I was, I think it was middle school or high school, I walked into my house and I walked into the room that my dad was in, and I remember saying, "Hey, dude." And just like that, my father turned and said, "I'm not your dude, I'm your dad. Don't ever call me that again." And I'm like, "Yes, sir," right? And I never called my dad dude again. Basically, on 100 times the level, the younger son is coming into the room and saying, "Hey, dude, I wish you were dead. Give me the money that you've promised me. Let's move on." That's the scene. I want you to get into the scene here because that's what's happening. Can you imagine the father in this scene? Right? Can you imagine what is taking place going through his mind? He has seen this younger son being raised. He's raised this son. He's worked alongside the son. He's had fun with this son, right? He's enjoyed life with the son. And yet the son comes to him and says, "Give me what you owe me," basically. How devastating, how frustrating, how heartbroken the father must be. And the story continues. The younger son, it says, collects all of the estate that the father has given him. Everything that he has, he's collected, right? He kind of liquidates the assets he has. He cashes everything out. He takes it. He kind of pockets it. And then it says he goes to a distant country. Jesus says he goes to a distant country. So let's just think Las Vegas, right? Sin City. That's where he's going. It doesn't tell us where the distant country is, but he's going off, and Jesus says he squandered his wealth on wild living. So imagine he goes to Vegas, and he's at the casinos, and he's drinking over here, and he's partying over here, and going to these clubs, and he's kind of making these friends, buying these clothes, these shoes. He's spending it all. This is my life. I'm trying to fulfill happiness. I want my life to feel full. I want excitement. I want friends. I want a party. I want this excitement. I think this is how I'm going to get it. Right? He spends it all on extravagance and immoral ways of living to try to find happiness and fulfillment and excitement in his life and provide that through these ways. And then verse 14 pops up. After he had spent everything, there was no savings account, there was no 401k, there was no college savings, everything's gone. There was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need, which might be an understatement, right? If you don't have anything and there's a famine in the country you live in, it's not a good combination. It goes on in verse 15, so he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. This is what I'd have you write down. Self-indulging leads to slavery, not celebration. Self-indulging leads to slavery, not celebration. The younger son got enamored with what would it look like to go kind of fill my desires and my wants with my estate or my share of the estate. So I'm going to go and just kind of spend it, live wild, do what I want to do, right? And it got him to this point. He cared more about the stuff than he did the relationship. Everything is gone now. Everything is gone. And then he hires himself out to this farmer. It's interesting, his consequences led him to slavery. The consequences led him to be a slave to this farmer. He had to hire himself out. He had to put himself in a position where he's like, I have nothing else. I have nothing else. I don't know what else to do just so I can eat and have shelter. I need to be here and work for you. What also is interesting is he worked with pigs. On this farm, he was working with pigs, and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, even that culture in that day, pigs were not something that people were pleased with. They were an unclean animal. They were dirty. People didn't mess with pigs. It was ugh, they didn't know bacon, right? They didn't know bacon back then, but they were like, this is an unclean animal. We don't want any part of this, and he's working with pigs. The religious leaders have been like, serves him right, and disgusting. Can you imagine that? To get to that level? My gosh, look at how pitiful he is. Look how disgusting he is. He'd work with pigs. Oh my goodness. And I think this scene can describe each and every one of us. I think it can. I think it does explain each and every one of us. Ephesians 2 lays it out like this. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins in which you used to live, when you followed the ways of this world and the ruler of the kingdom of air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us, which that word all, it really means all, lived among them at one time, gratifying, self-indulging, the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. The cravings of our flesh and desires of our heart push us to self-indulge our life. In the self-indulging life, it presents itself as celebratory and yet leads to destruction. The self-indulging life will present itself as celebratory. It will present itself as the big thing, happiness and fulfillment and excitement, and yet it ultimately leads to destruction. This is how I think about it because I like food. I think about going to a buffet. When you go to that $15, $20 buffet, which I don't even know if they're around anymore, but you pay and you're like, I'm going to make sure I get every cent's worth out of this meal because $15 for whatever food I can eat, heck yeah, I'm in, right? And so you jump in and you just eat and you eat and you eat and you're indulging and you're indulging and you're indulging. And then the next day you become a slave to your stomach, right? And the older you are, the worse it gets, I hear, right? You cannot stomach it. And so what happens is the self-indulging nature, I'm going to fill, all of a sudden it just wreaks havoc. You become a slave to whatever your stomach decides is next. And I think the self-indulging life, it leads to death and it leads to slavery in this life. So the question is, are you living the self-indulging life? Is that where you're at this morning? I think all of us have been there at one point or another if you're not there currently, right? We're just trying to fill up all of your wants and your desires with things that you think are going to ultimately give you fulfillment, purpose, meaning, happiness, and life. But what happens is it starts to rot and it starts to get yucky and your stomach starts to turn and all of a sudden you never know what's going to happen. For some of us, that's the question this morning. Are you living the self-indulging life? The story continues, though, in verse 17. See this. When he came to his senses, right? We've all been there, right? If you are a kid or have been a kid, you were there at one point with your parents. You came to your senses, right? He said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? Here's what's interesting about this statement. When the son would have left with the third estates or third of the estate, the family, the friends, the community would have kind of disowned him from the community. They've been like, God, serves him right. Get him out of here. We don't want him back. If that's where he wants to go, that's where he wants to go. And so I think as he's sitting there with the pigs, looking at what the pigs are eating, longing for what the pigs are eating, he's sitting there and going back to the Father isn't even crossing his mind. Because he's like, I've been kicked out. They won't want me back. They won't want to have me. And so he comes up with this plan. He says, maybe if I go back to the Father, this is my last hope. Maybe if I go back to the Father and I say, I will be a slave for you. Maybe that is where I could get in and have safety and security, and I can eat finally and kind of get back to normalcy. Right? He's kind of configuring this plan of how do I go back because I know they're not going to accept me. I know there's no way the Father's going to bring me back into the home. Then he goes back. Right? He starts the long trek. And if you've ever been there, right, you're late. You're past curfew when you're a teenager and you go back home, you're figuring up this plan in your mind. He's thinking about what he's going to say. And verse 20 comes. We see Jesus. He says this, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. I think this tells me something about the Father, that the Father was expecting, the Father was longing, and the Father was looking for the younger son. He had a desire. I want to see him come back. I want him to come back. I want him back here in my home. It says the Father was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. This is what I want you to write down. Compassion is at the heart of celebration. Compassion is at the heart of celebration. The Father's heart was bursting with compassion. God, I love the Son. I'm going to run out to him. Elders, like older people in that culture, would not have ran. Like father figures would not have ran. This would have been unique to see. He's running out to his son and gives him a hug and a kiss. And the Pharisees and religious leaders hearing this in the audience, Jesus telling his stories would have been like, what? That doesn't make sense. Why would the Father come back out? Don't you see what he has done to you? That's not what he deserves. He deserves to be with the pigs. He deserves to be back there. This doesn't make sense. And yet the Father continues to run into his son, throw his arms around him and kiss him. Now let's be real. For some of us in here, this is hard. Maybe for most of us in here, it's hard to fathom what the Father is doing right now. Think about it. A third of what you own is taken by one of your kids, run off, never to hear from again, and all of a sudden you see them walking down your street. You're sitting there. What would your response be, right? It's hard to fathom what is going on in this scene. Can you imagine it? The shock of what is going on. I think Psalm 145 gives us a picture into the heart of God and the Father. The Lord is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger, great in mercy. The Lord is good to all, and his tender mercies are over all his work. The Father invites the younger son with a burst of compassion, empathy, mercy, and love. He says, I want to invite you back into this. I have compassion for what you've walked through. I have compassion for where you're at. I love you, son, and I'm going to run out and share that with you. And I think compassion ultimately, it invites us into celebration. I think compassion and the heart of compassion invites us into celebration. That is the start for the younger son being invited into this celebration, right? And the heart of the father wants his son to return. What's interesting is the son, he's embraced by the father. He's kissing him. He's excited. He's like, I love you. I love you. And the son's like, okay, now it's time for the spiel. Father seems to be doing okay. Glad that I'm kind of back, doing things all right. And so he goes in. He's like, Father, I'm back, and I'll be your servant. I'll work for you. I'll do whatever you want. I'll make sure that we get everything figured out. I just want to be back and be your servant. What's interesting is the father responds in verse 22 and 24 like this. Jesus says, but the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. The best robe would have been reserved for the guest of honor. It says, put on a ring on his finger. The ring would have been a sign of authority, and sandals on his feet. Slaves did not wear sandals. Only sons and those in sonship wore sandals. Bring the fattened calf. This is not your Chick-fil-A cow. This is your Red Robin cow. They're like, this cow has been eating for years so that we could party eventually. This is the cow, the prize cow, the fat cow that we have saved for a celebration among all celebrations. And we're going to kill it tonight, and we're going to celebrate. It says, bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. And I don't think that you totally understand what we mean by celebrate. The father is ecstatic. The father is excited. The father's like, no. We need a party in here. You don't understand. There's a party happening. And we got this thing going on. There's music going, right? You got the party hats. He probably got the party hats going out. And so he's got these party hats happening. And he starts to get rocking and rolling. He starts to dance, right? Starts to get going. We're dancing, right? And the music's going. And so we're partying. The father's like, come on, everybody, dance with me, right? You got these blower things. I don't even know where you get these. You got those going on. You got these popper things, right? He's pulling these out. He's like, yes, this is exciting. You don't understand. He's got beads. He's tossing beads everywhere. He's got the fattened calf, which for us is pastries, right? You got pastries. If you come tonight, you will get pastries. I promise that, right? He's like, this is a party. We need to dance. We got the themed plates. We got the football plates, right, Matt? Like, right? You got these. You got these. We use these for my son's birthday. We're partying, dancing. He's like, you should not stop dancing. The son has returned, so let's party, right? He's going crazy, and we're excited. Music's going, and it's a blast, right? I wish I could do this times 10 and invite you all to dance with me the rest of the time, right? And they're just partying. They're having a good time. I had a hard time pulling this off the first service, so let's see how this goes. Ooh, this could be interesting, Paige. But what's interesting? Ooh, glasses don't help. Can we get it off? It's interesting. Before the party started, before all this craziness happens, right? In our culture, we get one of these. It's an invitation, right? You get a card, and you get it in the mail, or you get it handed to you, and in that invitation is usually details to the party that you're invited to. And in that invitation, you get an RSVP. And it says accept or decline, right? Accept if you're going to the party, or decline if you can't make it. And I think the Father wants us to see something before we get into the celebration. Something needs to happen. Celebrating begins with accepting the invitation of grace. Celebrating begins with accepting the invitation of grace. Listen, the younger son comes back and says, no, Father, I need to be your slave. You don't understand. I need to be working with all of those who are working for you. Like, that's how I'm going to get back into the right with you. That's how I'm going to figure it out. And he says, no, son. I want to invite you back in. And that whole process of building up to the celebration, he says, I want to invite you back in. I want to have grace and mercy and love, and I'm going to invite you back in as my son, not as a slave. Accept that. Quick, get the robe, get the ring, right? Get the sandals, get the fattened calf, everything you'd put on a party for your son. And I think today that God, the Father, wants us to see that accepting the invitation of grace is saying yes to Jesus. That accepting the invitation of grace is saying yes to Jesus. That this celebration happens, but you need to accept the invitation that God has extended to you. It's understanding that no matter what has taken place, that no matter what you have done, no matter where life has taken you, the decisions, the self-indulging life that you may be on, that you can walk back to the Father. You can walk back to the Father, and the Father's going to look at you and say, I have grace and mercy, that I want you to be my son. Even though you don't deserve it, I'm going to extend it to you. And that extension we've seen by him sending Jesus to die on the cross for us. He died on the cross for us so that we could say yes to Jesus and experience relationship, eternity relationship with God. And he says, accept that. Then let's party. I got the fattened calf. Let's have a good time. Let's party. You don't understand. I think they're celebrating, and Paul writes it like this. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive. We were dead. Now we're alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. This son went from dead to alive, lost to found. He's like, there's celebration in that. And it's by grace that you go from dead to alive. It's not by your works. It's not by what you do. It's not by your identity and what you have done. It's by saying yes to me and accepting the grace, the undeserved act of saying, here you go. I want you to be a part of my family. Luke 15:10 says this, in the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Right? Heaven is partying. Heaven is having a grand old time celebrating and rejoicing when sinners come to be saved. It's like, you don't understand. That is the business of heaven. You don't understand that. It's a party. I want you to be a part of that, right? For some of us, that's where it starts this morning. I don't want to miss that. For some of us, it starts there by saying yes to Jesus, accepting the grace, the undeserved act. We don't deserve that. We don't deserve Jesus dying for our sins. Right? We deserve to die for our sins. He said, if you believe, trust, put your life in me, you will be saved. But the story continues in verse 25. See this. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. Right? So he called one of the servants, asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. There's a party happening. The older son's like, what's going on? Right? Servant, come here. I want to know what's going on. What is happening? The servant explains it to him, and this is the older brother's response. In verse 28, the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. I'd have you write this down. We'll spend a bit here. Self-righteousness can lead to slavery, not celebration. Self-righteousness can lead to slavery, not celebration. Right, the older brother, he hears the music, he hears the dancing, he comes back, he realizes his long-lost brother is the one that they're celebrating. He's like, what? What? What's going on? And he responds to the father like so. I'm going to continue 29 and 30, but he answered his father, look at all these years I've been slaving for you, never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. It's like, come on, I've slaved for you, I didn't disobey you, and you didn't even throw a party with like a little goat for me and my friends. How could this be? I think self-righteousness can kill our ability to celebrate. Self-righteousness can kill our ability to celebrate. This older son is like, Father, I am like beyond myself. I'm upset. I'm irritated. I've done all this stuff for you. Don't you see all the years that I've been working for you? I've been kind of lining this all up. I should be the one getting this party. I should be the one that has the fattened calf. And yet all this time missing the relationship with the Father. More worried about the external recognition of I've done well enough for you, Father. I think the two brothers have something in kind. They have something similar. The younger son, he didn't have a relationship with his father basically by self-indulging and disowning and saying, I'm running away from this, right? The older brother, I think, also didn't have a relationship with the father, but he did it by just kind of grinding it out and obeying and trying to get to that estate, trying to get to the inheritance, right? If I do well enough, then I'll get the inheritance, then we can figure everything out, and yet never having a relationship with the Father in the midst of that. And continues in verse 31 and 32. Father says, my son, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. You've missed it. You've missed it. Right? You're just grinding this out, trying to do the dutiful thing, trying to make sure everything, you're obeying, you're serving. Yes, but you've missed it. Everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. I think ultimately the Father is saying, do not forget to continue to celebrate with me. We can have that initial party and forget to celebrate continually with the Father, right? He's like, older son, you have everything I have. Like, celebrate with me. Enjoy it. Like, it's yours. You don't understand that, right? And yet the older son totally missed that by trying to do all the rights and the wrong. Join me on the daily journey of celebrating the relationship you have with me. That's what he invites us into, right? That's what he invites us into. The grace of God, the invitation of the Father says, do this on a daily basis. So what is celebration? Let's bust through this real quick. What's the application to this? What is celebration? Celebration is rejoicing that produces the fruit of joy, right? Celebration is rejoicing that produces the fruit of joy. Philippians 4:4. Paul is writing this in prison. Philippians is a great book of the Bible, a great letter that he writes to the church in Philippi. He writes this, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Like, shocking, right? He's in prison, and that's what he's writing. He's like, always rejoice. Every situation, no matter what, be rejoiceful, be in joy, celebrate, right? And so a couple questions I would ask. First one is this, am I celebrating my salvation? Am I celebrating my salvation? Luke 15:10, we went through this already. Basically, in heaven, every sinner comes to say yes to Jesus. Every sinner is saved. There is a party in heaven. It's the business of heaven is to celebrate those things. They are partying up there. Are we celebrating our salvation on a daily basis? Oh, I fear it becomes a memory and a moment. We're like, yeah, that's when I said yes to Jesus. And yet we go on Monday through Sunday of our life and we totally disregard it. Doesn't become something we go back on. Doesn't become something we celebrate. Doesn't become something of a daily routine. We can become self-indulging. What happens is we lose sight of the sacrifice and surrender that Jesus made for us on the cross. Or we can become self-righteous. We lose sight in the monotony and the duty of following Jesus. Oh, it's become such a duty, right? I said yes to Jesus back then. We had a party. Woo! And this is not a party. It's kind of we're just doing this thing, right? Fall in those two camps. 1 Thessalonians 5, Paul says, rejoice always. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. It's like Paul's like, always, this should be all the time. We should give thanks, rejoice. We should be abundantly celebrating what God has done for us. If we are not, we are missing the point. We're missing the point, and we can get so caught up in the monotony of what is going on. But I also think that we need to be willing to celebrate the salvation of others. Right? When others say yes to Jesus and they tell us, it shouldn't be like, whoop, you did it? Yeah, good job, and we move on. It's like, yes, oh my gosh, you went from dead to life. You were lost, now you're found. Let's party. I'll have you over for dinner. We'll have cake. We'll have ice cream. Let's party. Oftentimes I think it just becomes, it's like, isn't that what people are supposed to do, right? And it's like, yes, it's like, this is awesome. This is exciting. We need to celebrate others. We cannot lose sight of that. We kind of just go through the motions of Christianity and we can miss that. Secondly, I would say this, am I celebrating my suffering? James 1 hashes out, consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, face many trials of many kinds, right? It's hard to kind of articulate this. And a lot of you have walked through trials and suffering and temptations and you're like, it's hard. We all have walked through some form of this, right? It can be hard to understand how to navigate joy in that because joy in our culture is kind of devoid of suffering and pain, right? That's when you experience joy. And yet Paul would say it's pure joy when you walk through that. That in the midst of it, that's when you should be experiencing it and running into it the most. That God is doing his most profound work in the darkness. So run into him in the midst of that. Lastly, I would write this. Am I celebrating with others? Am I celebrating with others? Romans 12:15. Rejoice with those who rejoice, right? Have joy with those who have joy. Oftentimes, I struggle with this deeply. Other people become competition instead of a way to celebrate and a form of celebration. Other people are competition to me. Well, they're better than me, or they did that better than me. Oh, am I losing track? Am I losing ground, you know? And what I think is, if you're a part of the body of Christ, if you've said yes to Jesus, our first and foremost thing should be to celebrate and encourage those. The gifts and the talents and the ways that God has created us, we should celebrate beyond celebrate. We should be walking around saying, that's amazing, look what you did. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, I'm so grateful for you. Oh my gosh, on a daily basis. They are not competition. It's a part of the team and the family. So how does this play out? Day in and day out, how would we see this? 4 things, and I promise I'm done. First, say yes to Jesus. Say yes to Jesus. For some of you, you've said yes to Jesus already, and I would say it is just continually saying yes to Jesus on a daily basis and celebrating that. Celebrate it. If you are in here and you've not said yes to Jesus before, maybe this is the first time to say yes to Jesus. Maybe today is the day that you jump into the celebration and jump into the party and jump into saying yes to Jesus and accepting the invitation of grace, the unmerited, undeserved freedom from your sins and everlasting life with the Father, eternal life with the Father. Secondly, I would say baptism is an easy way to see that. That is the Super Bowl of Grace Church. We love baptism. And the next baptism is April 12th. Okay, it's April 12th, which is Easter Sunday, and we are going to party hard on Easter Sunday with baptisms. It is a blast to see people's lives publicly proclaiming, I have said yes to Jesus. I've gone from death to life. We should be ecstatic. We should be clapping. We should be cheering. We should be hooting and hollering. That is the moment that we should be celebrating over and over and over again, right? I would say, thirdly, corporate celebration. This is not a service. This is a public Jesus gathering. It's a public Jesus gathering where we get to celebrate every single Sunday. It's not a service to check off your list. It's not we have these services and times you can attend and kind of come and sit down. It's like we get to celebrate. So come in looking to celebrate. Worship night tonight, come to that. We're going to celebrate. I won't dance. We'll just celebrate together. How's that sound, you know? That's what we have it for. We want to celebrate who Jesus is and what he's done for us and just lift his name high. We have these things so that we can just draw together celebration. Lastly, individual celebration. In the moments of monotony, in the moments of the mundane, find ways to celebrate. Listen, I've started doing this with Corbin on Thursdays. I will crank the music in our house and we will dance and we will just have fun. Sing and dance with your kids, even if you look ridiculous and your kids are teenagers and they're gonna make fun of you, right? Sing and dance. Find ways to celebrate with your kids. Find ways to celebrate in hobbies and interests. Find ways to celebrate on holidays around the dinner table. Find ways to celebrate stories and moments from your week, right? Find ways to celebrate through scripture and through, we talked about meditating, right? Find ways to celebrate who God is and what he's done for you in the midst of it all, right? We're celebrating. We picked tonight to be the worship night so that we could start practicing this spiritual practice together. We wanted to do this so that we could practice celebration tonight. You can launch your week with that. So I would love for you to be a part of that, okay? I'd love for you to jump into that. Let's pray.